If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is the most creepiest thing you saw even though you are very skeptical about paranormal things? One night, I was driving the car with my friend in the passenger seat. We were taking back roads just listening to music. There was nobody else around, and the stretch we were in was without streetlights. Out of nowhere, two blaring lights shined in the rearview mirror. I swear, I looked at the mirror and saw a car right behind me. Since nobody had been around just seconds ago, I assumed the car must be driving pretty ducking fast. So I floored it. I braced myself for impact. A second later, when nothing happened, I looked back at the rearview mirror. There was nothing but the faint red from my own tail lights. I slowed and told my friend what I just saw. She admitted, she did not see any such lights. She did, however, get a creepy feeling and shivered just moments before I saw it. The cherry on top? The road we were on is one that my driver's ed instructor had me drive on, 16 long years ago. On that same stretch of road, he was telling me a story about some teen who was driving recklessly and drunk on that street. He went on describing the kid and how he went driving along with his buddies, up until we came to a slight curve and he pointed to a memorial cross on the side of the road, and that's where he crashed. My friend and I were out cruising around Lebanon, coming back from a night out in Beirut and heading up the mountains to my place. My friend took a wrong turn, and we figured we'd just drive up the road and turn around. The moment we finished the freeway ramp, we ended up in this deserted, secluded town, which looked like a military installation. It looked brand spanking new, satellite dishes everywhere, gates, barbed wire, etc. We thought we wandered off some recon installation or something, but it was odd. There was absolutely no one. The creepiest part. None of that area looked like Lebanon at all. Like we teleported someplace else. All the buildings were extremely modern, European/Western-like, and there was not a single soul, yet the installation was abuzz with activity. We were freaking out, and got the hell out ASAP. For years, we've attempted to find the place again and failed. Everyone we talk to mentions that such a place does not exist. We've tried finding it again and again, and we've come to wonder now if we somehow came across a wormhole tier into another dimension/space from how surreal and completely different that area looked than anything in Lebanon. I was friends with a girl who just moved into this old house. It was a house her grandma had and had been in the family for generations. It was pretty old. Anyway, I went over one night shortly after she had moved in and had done some painting. She was giving me the tour of place, showing me which rooms she painted, and we went upstairs where the bedrooms were. At the end of the hall was a guest room. The door was open and the room was dark with some of the hall light shining in a ways. We both stood at the top of the steps for a second admiring the nice paint job she had done in the hallway, when a man in fatigues crawled across the ceiling in the semi-dark guest room at the end of the hall. I think, but I'm not sure, he turned and looked at us as he passed the door, but can't remember exactly. He seemed very intent. Like he was going somewhere. Even just thinking about this now, my heart is racing. Neither of us said a thing, we just turned and hurried back downstairs. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. She followed me but then was like, "Are you sure you don't want to stay longer?" I was literally like, "What the actual duck?" I got in my car and left. I think I cried a little. We weren't friends much longer after that. We didn't talk about it at first, then she would bring it up and I just had this creepy awful feeling that if we talked about it, it would start haunting my house or something. Anyway, I moved pretty far away not long after and I just let the friendship die. I've only told 2 people about this and it makes me nauseous just thinking about it now. Sometimes I wonder if we had some sort of shared hallucination, but I don't think so. It still creeps me out. Friends and I, way back in the before times, were hiking out of the bush one night, 5 of us in total. We were walking along a well-known path in single file. All relatively close to each other, but I was in the lead with Ed right behind me and the other 3 about 6 to 8 feet behind us. It's dark, you can barely see, but it's a path we'd been on hundreds of times. This path intersects with an old stone fence line at roughly a 90-degree angle. So I'm walking and looking down when we hit that spot so I don't trip on the stones. I look up and there's the unmistakable outline of a man, a very tall, broad-shouldered man standing directly in front of me, within a foot or less. I stopped Ed in my tracks. I'm just looking at this outline and Ed ducking shoved me into what should have been this man standing there. Only, nothing. I stumbled into nothing. He was gone. I turned to Ed but before I could say anything Ed said there was a guy standing there. All I could say was, "You saw that, right?" By then the other 3 were like, "What's the holdup?" They didn't see anything. We continued on. Ed and I didn't say anything else until we got out of the bush. We told the other guys and we talked about it. They were skeptical but took our story at face value. I never went back there again in the dark. The spine-tingling goosebumps I felt when I just fell through, whatever it was, are back as I write this. That's my true, weird as duck story. Myself and 3 friends went camping and took acid around 8 years ago. The place we pitched our tent was nice, on a cliff looking over the water. Nearby was an old cemetery. Midway through the trip things were getting pretty visually stimulating, so we decided to head off to the cemetery and check it out. The 3 friends I was with were all walking a few feet ahead of me. We were all in silence, just losing our minds. When suddenly the 3 of them, in unison and without uttering a sound, stopped dead in their tracks, spun around and started walking away. I was immediately confused, thinking maybe one of my mates said something and that's why everyone just turned around like a choreographed dance move. Once I asked what the F.K. just happened, the response I got was the same from all 3. I just got this feeling I should leave. And with that, all 3 never spoke of it again. To this day I still find it damn odd, and in later years have learnt the cemetery was once used by the old asylum that's located in the middle of the ocean near where we camped. Supposedly, there's quite a lot of unmarked graves that reside there. My great-grandmother lived in an old Victorian-style house that was way more than she could take care of and sliding into disrepair. The kitchen has sort of been redone by family at the end of the 50s or early 60s in the prevailing style of the time. It had a dirt basement. And she was really into ceramics. Had a room for it. Shelves full of it. And in seemingly every corner there was an individual handmade ceramic doll in a chair on a needlepoint pillow. Her cats hated people. Especially Pitty Pat, who very much loved drawing the blood of children. And great-grandmother herself spoke very little. Just smoking and chuckling away in her chair, especially if Pitty Pat tagged someone unexpectedly. Anyway, me and my cousins were left there one night, when a thunderstorm briefly interrupted power. So, if a ghost ain't gonna show up when a reflected lightning flash illuminates a ceramic doll in a sinister manner while an old woman cackles in amusement to herself in a house more than 100 years old, it's probably not going to happen. My dad lives in a very rural part of the world. Like, the village he lives in has a couple of farms, about 10 houses, a pub, a church, and that's it. It doesn't even have street lamps. When I was a teenager, my stepsister and I went to a friend's house at the other end of the village for a barbecue. We were there a few hours, and it started to go dark, so we decided to head back. There is only one road through the village, so we were walking along the edge of the road. It wasn't a long walk, probably about 5 to 10 minutes back home. And as we are walking, we start to hear horse hooves walking along the road, quiet, off in the distance. Not unusual, lots of people round their own horses. We didn't pay it any mind at first. But the sound got steadily louder and louder as we walked towards it, and it came towards us. It got to a point where it was loud enough that we should have been able to see the horse and rider, but there was nothing. The road was deserted apart from us too, yet the sound grew louder and louder still. By this point we were both stood still, just kind of frozen and confused. It got to the point where it should have been literally right next to us, and just stopped. We freaked out and ran back home, and that was probably the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me, made me somewhat less of a skeptic. This happened over a year ago, during midwinter. My family cabin tends to get cold inside, even with full heating system and a fireplace, during the winter months. Temperatures could drop easily to -30 to 40 C. I sleep with my poodle dog, and his favorite position is to snuggle up and almost spoon with me from my back. Although not the biggest dog, he does make me feel warm and comfy. Now this evening in question, my dog was not himself all day. He would not just hop onto the bed like usual, instead he was sitting and staring out the window. It got dark around 5 and just started snowing, so the mood was chilly but cozy. I was watching a YouTube video when my dog finally decided to hop onto the bed and cuddle up in my back. This is where shit goes from 0 to 100 real fast. I heard my dog growl at me from near the window. Sudden rush of adrenaline makes me turn around and push the hairy thing on my bed that was definitely not my dog, and I jumped off the bed to near the window where my dog actually was. Then after catching my breath, I got up and turned on the lights. There was nothing on my bed, not even a dent, just a messed up blanket and pillows. I swear to God I must have dreamt it, but my dog growling felt so real. I was the night watchman at a historical site in my hometown. It was a plantation and was about 1,200 acres of mostly woodland. There were a lot of creepy, paranormal things I encountered while I worked there, but the one that sticks with me was the thing I started calling the Deer King. I was patrolling the back half of the property where a smaller house and the graveyard were. Deer usually grazed all night in the graveyard and everything else on that side of the property. I was about to walk up to do one of my scheduled tours near the graveyard when some of the deer caught my attention. They just looked funny. One of them was a buck with huge antlers. It looked like a crown coming out of its head. Honestly, I was a singing princess away from this being a Disney movie until the thing stood up. It put a hoof on the tree in front of it. Then it put another hoof on the tree trunk. It had thumbs. It started pulling itself upright and I noticed it had a face where its chin and throat were. A person's face. It was like one of those blank white masks you get at Halloween, but it was a complete face blended in with the fur. It pulled itself upright and just stared at me. I don't know if it was a warning or an invitation, so I just got back in the truck and got the hell out of there. After that, anytime I saw that deer grazing in the cemetery, I waved and kept driving. It's been a few years now and I've tried to chalk it up to an overactive imagination. And if that had been the only encounter I'd had on the property, I wouldn't even think about it anymore. But that wasn't even the weirdest encounter I had out there, just the most visually bizarre. There's a rational answer for everything, whether or not I know what it is. That said, every time I've ended up at a cemetery, any cemetery, since then I end up encountering deer. This happened when I was 12. We were in the middle of a huge storm that had knocked out everyone's power, and I was at a friend's house with some other friends cause their house had a backup generator. I looked out of the window that faced the back garden and the forest beyond it, and when the lightning flashed, I thought I saw a tall man's silhouette standing in the garden, looking straight in the window. At that moment, the backup generator stopped. Note this was at around 2 a.m. so no adults were awake, and for some reason I couldn't hear anyone anymore, but when the lightning flashed again, I saw their silhouettes, as well as in the tall man, inside the room. At that point, I started hearing static, and I think I blacked out. When I woke up, all my friends were staring at me and the lights were back on. They told me that the backup generator had been hit by a branch that fell off a tree, and when the power went out I started screaming and sobbing and then blacked out. I did some research, and am sure that figure was Slender Man, but everyone denies it ever happened. To this day that is still the creepiest experience I ever had. Phantom scream. I was driving home late one night and I heard the loudest scream directly in my ear. Made me slam on my brakes. Nothing was around, didn't hit anything, didn't see anything. It was so loud you'd think a megaphone was in my car. Still think about it 20 years later. Years ago something? Knocked 3 times on my bathroom door and nobody else was home. I was in the shower and I always felt the need to shut and lock the door when I showered in that house. Had a feeling of being cornered in that bathroom. The weird thing is that it was a brand new house. I thought maybe it was my SO playing a prank, though it was way too early for him to be home from work. I jumped out and quickly got dressed, but he wasn't home. Sat on the driveway until he got back. Also, in the same house, woke up in the middle of the night one time to my dog standing over me in the bed and staring out into the living room growling. This was a goofy, happy dog who never met a stranger. Not a watchdog at all. And the fact that he didn't get off the bed or go check it out was creepy as hell. He eventually laid back down but seemed on edge. Needless to say, I stayed in bed and didn't face that doorway. My parents moved together in 1983. They found a stray black cat in the barn. They adopted her and a few years later I was born. We were best friends. She even saved my life once, when I was a baby. TBH, for me as a single child she was kind of a big sister. We had to put her down because of cancer when she was, valued, 25 years old and I was 15. Since this day sometimes my family and I saw a black cat out of the corner of our eyes. Sometimes it would just sit on the floor. Usually it turned out to be a dark object like a bag, for example. Sometimes it was a shadow speeding through the living room for a split second. We used to joke about it and liked the idea of our cat being still around. A few years later my mother, our third cat by then, and I were in the kitchen. Mum prepared dinner, cat just got his food and we were talking about the day. For a moment my mum and I looked through the kitchen door into the living room at the same time and saw the shadow, fast as a spark. We were like, did you see that, too? And lol, imagination. We stopped laughing when we took a look at our cat. He was staring in the living room's direction, petrified for seconds. Then he slowly started to walk out of the kitchen and intensely sniffed the exact spot where we had seen the shadow. It was super spooky seeing a pet reacting like that. We were always sure it was a trick of our human imagination since we loved our first cat so much and lived with her for such a long time, but obviously there was something not only visible for us. I live in a house that only has the master bedroom, a smaller bedroom, and a small bathroom at the top of the stairs. The 2 bedroom doors face each other, maybe 7 to 8 feet apart. I'm the only one who lives on the top floor, everyone else stays on the ground floor. I always got a weird vibe from the bedroom across from mine, so I always keep the door shut. One day about 2 years ago, I had come home from college at the time and decided to take a nap. I remember laying down and falling asleep rather quickly, but something felt wrong. I sat up, and noticed that the door to my bedroom was open. The door to the guest bedroom was also open. I watched the doorway for a moment like I was waiting for something. I didn't even know what I was waiting for, truthfully, but I waited. Surely enough, this thing bent itself down to look back at me through the guest bedroom doorway. It was tall, way too tall for the size of the room. I only remember it having antlers and being very dark/shadowy in form. Also its eyes. Its eyes were a very muted red tone and flat, like there was no other shape or features of its face. I felt like it wanted to come into my room, but for whatever reason it couldn't. And it was pissed about it. We never exchanged anything verbal, but I remember calmly looking at it and reminding it that it was not welcome in my room, much less my house. I knew it was just waiting for an opportunity where my guard was down. And then I woke up. Both of the doors were closed, and everything was fine. I was spooked to hell and back, burnt so much incense I thought I was going to smoke out my entire family. I haven't seen or dreamt of it since, but lots of guests I've brought into the house do not like that room. Whatever it was, I hope it's gone for good. Me and a bunch of friends used to break into this abandoned asylum. There had been a long-standing rumor that anyone who takes something from there is haunted or followed. Was a story of one kid who took something and kept seeing a dark figure at his bedroom window at night until he returned it. Obviously I didn't believe any of that. So one night we're snooping and we find a lot of medical records and really old books. Had some crazy stuff in them, so I decided to take one of the books with me. When we got outside my phone buzzed, and I looked and my timer had started. It was set for 5 minutes and counting down. None of us knew what it meant and I didn't set it, so we decided to wait it out and see what would happen. 5 minutes was up and nothing. So we went on our way, with the book. A couple days later we're driving down this road at like 5 a.m. My friend loses control of the car, we crash into a phone pole, flip, and land nose first in a small lake. The car was absolutely destroyed. One friend was thrown from the backside window, which ended up saving our lives because none of the doors were working and we all had to get out that way. Water pressure doesn't let doors open, which is why the advice for a car in water is to let it sink and then open the doors. Amazingly, I was the only one seriously injured with a broken leg. Even the guy who got thrown landed in the lake, so he was fine. Nobody else had more than a few bruises and cuts. One girl stayed in the hospital overnight for observation because she had an existing heart issue, but was fine. Paramedics showed up with body bags because a neighbor who called and saw the accident was convinced we were all killed. Days later, when I went to go collect valuables from my car that had been pulled from the wreckage, I saw the book. It was in the back seat where I'd been sitting. I realized that timer was my last chance to put the book back before something bad happened to me. And something bad did happen. It's been about 4 years and I still can't really use the leg right. I can't run or jump anymore, and I used to be super active. I can never get that back. But to be fair, the book will never be returned either. I left it in the car. I took the book. They took my mobility. I think the only things that saved me were that I keep a scapular in my car, religious item, and I also have keepsakes of loved ones who died in my car at all times for protection. Let the dead rest, whether it's in a graveyard or an abandoned building. I had 2 creepy things happen to me when I was very young, both on camping trips in northern Michigan. Back when I around 7 to 9, my family would have yearly camping trips up to Oscoda, along the Osable River, incredible area for fishing, lots of good memories with my late father. Both of these stories have to do with hearing/seeing strange things and apparent memory loss. Also, apologies for the text wall. The first story, my family and I were gathered around the campfire after having enjoyed a dinner of fire-roasted hot dogs, fish and s'mores. It was around 10 p.m. so we decided to pack it in for bed. Our camper was one of those small pop-up trailers with barely enough room for 5 to 6 people. Anyway, for some reason I was the last one to the camper and the door was suddenly slammed on me. I was locked outside of the camper. I grabbed the door handle and tried to yank it open, calling for my family to let me in, but there was no response. My child mind is already panicking and freaking out, as I see no light in the camper and hear absolute silence. No one is talking in the camper, I don't hear my family walking about or climbing into bed. All I hear are crickets and cicadas. I remember as I saw our external hanging lanterns starting to dim and die, it sounded like the surrounded insects were doing the same. Like, lowering their calls in pitch to the point where it sounded more like unnerving groaning and retching. At this point I'm sweating and crying and throwing myself at the door, probably not the most effective strategy considering it was a pull door. I'm screaming for my family to let me in when I hear heavy footsteps around the camp and quickly, something dashing through the embers of the fire pit and rushing at me. I had no chance, something large grabbed me by my armpits and ripped me away from the camper door. Then I wake up. Inside the camper. My dad had picked me up to pull me off of the door. Apparently around an hour after bed, I sleepwalked to the door and just started banging on it and screaming. I scared my whole family, especially my mother, who for a moment thought I actually had been trapped outside somehow. I remember getting over it quickly as a kid, but as I got older and thought on it, a lot of stuff started creeping me out. I don't remember going to bed. I don't even remember going into the camper. This dream or whatever I had felt so real that I have virtually no idea when real life transitioned into the dream. For all I know, that entire day could have been a dream. This is the only time in my entire life I've sleepwalked, and also the only time I've had a nightmare that vivid. It creeps me out to this day because I don't remember that night whatsoever, but I can recall that dream in detail. Second story, this one happened a year or two later. In Oscoda, same camping ground, same exact site. It's night, I'm having a lot of trouble sleeping. I'm a natural insomniac, even as a kid, so I was pretty used to feeling restless at night. This was different, however. I had this hollow feeling in my gut that something terrible was coming. Like that expanding ball of anxiety that starts in your stomach and pushes out, flushing over your arms and legs and making you shiver. It was that, over and over. I didn't know what was happening, but my body was screaming at me that something was very wrong. When I tried to distract myself from the welling dread, that's when I noticed the outside forest was dead silent. No insects, bats, calls from bobcats or raccoons. Just nothing. It honestly felt like I'd been transported into another plane of existence, and the only thing keeping me tethered to reality was my heartbeat. I roll over on my back, pulling my sleeping bag up tighter, and I blink. Just once. And it's morning. An instantaneous transition from a dead, spooky night to an extremely noisy morning. I hear the fire crackling outside, I hear my brother and father talking about something. I hear distant motorboats passing along on the Sable River where we're camped right next to. I remember feeling like all the energy and strength had just been pulled from me, like I hadn't slept at all. I had pulled all-nighters as a kid before, but this felt as if I had been awake for several days. My eyes had hurt, as if I had been straining them all night long. I was also still in the same exact position on my back, hands still clenched around the edges of my sleeping bag as I had pulled it. I tend to roll around a lot when I sleep, so this creeped me out the most. I asked my siblings if something weird happened last night, and they just looked at me like I had two heads. Everyone else had apparently slept soundly through the night except me. I knew I had not slept at all that night, but for some reason I had absolutely no memory of those 8 to 9 hours. IDK if I'm overthinking it, but this is the only time I've experienced something like that in my life. The sleepwalking and now this, two weird happenings both occurring at this same exact camp spot. My GF had broken up with me, and I was now sleeping alone in the townhome apartment that we had both been living in. For the first time in 3 years I was alone every night. There was someone who had been hopping fences into backyards at night, trying to get into sliding glass doors, and in general smashing stuff in the area. And a month or two prior there was a shooting and attempted murder in the dead of night right on the sidewalk in front of our door. So needless to say, being home alone at night put me on edge. No alarm system, no dog, no firearms, just me. Well, one night I wake up in the dark, only pale moonlight coming through my window and the darkness of the upstairs hallway and stairwell outside my door, and I hear, Dreg_02, come here from my doorway, then the sounds of dozens of loud whispers. I try to move, to turn and face it, to defend myself, but my body won't move an inch. I try to shout or scream, to be threatening, but my voice won't come. I'm trapped inside my body, aware of something at my bedroom doorway and can't physically do anything. I try to struggle and scream in silence some more until finally the paralysis breaks and I can slowly move and begin to murmur and moan, still having difficulty making sounds. I finally can face my doorway and find no one and nothing there. Turns out this was my worst bout of sleep paralysis to date. I'm fine, I'm safe, but I close and lock my bedroom door, then sleep with all of the lights on in my place for the rest of the night. It ducking sucks so bad. Being a prisoner in my body like that, not even able to utter a panicked moan, while I can hear and feel something/someone coming for me. Gives me shudders remembering it. Duck sleep paralysis. My brother came running into my room late one night when our dad was working late. I think I was 18 years old at the time and my brother was 17. He asked me to go downstairs and turn off all the lights in the house before our dad came home. Our family was broke, so a bunch of lights on would have gotten us yelled at. I gave him the WTF man, go do it yourself, but I could tell something was wrong. He was scared and quiet, he was holding his hand and had it bandaged, and kept asking me if he could sleep in my bedroom. None of it made any sense to me, so I turned off my stereo and went downstairs to turn off all the lights. Mistake number 1. My brother had every single light on downstairs. hallways, living room, kitchen, dining room, and our unfinished basement. It was ridiculous because it was so late and we were the only two home at the time. The basement light being on confused me too because it was weird and none of us kids really ever went down there. It was one of those basements with dirt for the ground, all the wood looked like it was crumbling, and it smelled like rotting dust and mold. I went around the house and turned off all the lights while not realizing I was saving the basement lights for last. Mistake number 2. I walked down the old rotting wood stairs to turn off the lights in the basement, and what I saw and heard down there has forever broken me. On the dirt floor facing a wall was a bunch of lit candles that were evenly distributed among the points of a pentagram drawn into the dirt floor. There was an open book to the right of the pentagram, a Ouija board, and a hunting knife with some blood on it resting next to the book. As well as a very large black shadow in the corner of the room. It was dead silent in that basement. So silent I remember hearing my heart pumping through my chest as I looked around the room and ended up staring at the black mass in the corner of the basement. Then something spoke from that shadow that sounded like a woman. Very, very, very softly. You need to bury your roots deeper. Needless to say, I was paralyzed in fear. After maybe 3 to 5 seconds, which felt like 5 minutes, of staring into that darkness, I started walking backwards towards the stairs so I could get out of the basement. This was my final mistake, and as I type this, tears in my eyes are falling and every hair on my body is standing up. When I was walking backwards upstairs and finally had enough courage to turn around at the last step from the doorway, a dark silhouette was standing there, completely black and easily identified even with all the lights of behind it. This thing was impossibly dark, and when I saw it I remember uncontrollably starting whimper like a baby, but nothing audible coming out of my mouth. Then I was pushed back down the basement stairs and I must have hit my head because it knocked me out completely. The next thing I remember was my dad helping me get into my bed. I can no longer go in basements or attics when it's dark out, or if I even get a whiff of this looks scary. The real kicker is my brother denied everything and I got in trouble. My brother must have went down there, saw me knocked out, cleaned up his little summing circle, and finished turning off all the lights in the house because my dad knew nothing of what he did. Apparently my brother was the hero in this story because I had tripped and fallen down in the basement, and my brother found me and called my dad to come home from work because I was unconscious. After all the arguing and fending off that I was lying between my dad and brother, I started to believe maybe it was all just a dream, and getting knocked out gave me this crazy dream which seemed so terrifying. It almost got to a point where I felt okay living in that house with that horrible ducking basement. I had to sit near it every time we ate because the entrance to it was in our dining room. Then one day months later, when all of us were eating dinner, dad, brother, and 2 younger sisters, we heard what sounded like a child crying, shrieking, and snarling down in the basement. My dad said it would probably a cat or fox or something and went downstairs into the basement to see what was going on. My dad came back up a couple minutes later, said nothing, immediately went outside and grabbed a large piece of drywall, some nails, a hammer, and then boarded up the basement entrance during our meal that night. He told us from now on no one is allowed to go in the basement because it wasn't safe. From that moment I knew it was all real. I told my dad it was the brother's fault, and when dad confronted brother, my brother admitted everything and pulled a box out of his closet containing the book, knife, Ouija board, and candles. Yes, my dumbass brother kept all that shit in his closet. My dad lost his cool, yelled at my brother, and then took all that stuff and dug a hole next to a tree in our backyard. Dad took all the contents of that box, put them in hole, set it all on fire, then covered the ashes with dirt. We didn't have anything else weird happen in the home. My youngest sister's bedroom did have a closet that people didn't really feel comfortable around. When family would come over for sleepovers, the cousins would say they didn't like staying in her room. But other than that, everything was pretty normal. Even the boarded up basement seemed normal after a while. With that said, I still wonder if we didn't bury our roots deep enough. We had an old house on our property. Had some human ceramic figurines on the wall. Older brother and sister thought they would have a good time by convincing me to walk through the house on my own while they made scary noises from closets and etc. I knew it was them. I knew what they were up to, but hey, they were paying attention to me for a change, so I decided to play the game. Walking through, I hear noises from an off room. Yep, that is my sister. Thumping from upstairs. Yep, that is my brother. Then weirdly, I heard a voice I didn't recognize. I look around, and the human figurines are talking to each other. Like midday tea chat. Then when I look around, I saw the house as it was when it was lived in. The faded print of the wallpaper was vibrant. The plaster dust on the floors was gone and the hardwood was shiny and clean. There was a doily-clad chair in the corner with a smoking table next to it. Curtains on the windows, a runner on the floor, and I could smell onions and meat cooking from the kitchen. I burst into tears, and brother and sister thought they went too far in their scare attempts and came to console me. They thought they were the ones that scared me and no one would listen when I tried to tell them what actually scared me. I have looked, but have never seen ceramic wall figures like that old house had, but I am pretty sure they had to be likenesses of the previous owners. A few years ago my family went to my sister's friend's birthday party. When we went to drive home, it was nighttime. We were driving home, and my parents noticed some glowing eyes and immediately slowed down. We live in Wisconsin, so we assumed it was a deer as usual. However, when my parents looked closer, they noticed it was a cow. A cow had been just standing in the middle of the road. We were waiting for it to move, and then my parents noticed more shadows. There were more cows behind that cow, and they were walking over towards our car. We backed up into a nearby driveway. We thought we were safe, but the cows followed our car. Before we knew it, an entire herd of cows was marching along toward the driveway. We watched as we were trapped in a driveway with an entire herd of cows cornering us. The cows eventually surrounded our car, and at that point we couldn't move at all. My parents had called the police to get the cow situation in control by this point. We waited and waited, getting more concerned about how the cows were coming right up to the car and pushing it. I could hear the cows through the vents in the car. My parents kept frantically calling the police, urging them to come, and they kept saying that they were on their way. Eventually the cows moved away from the driveway and back into the road. We were trying to figure out what to do next, because we figured the cows would see the headlights and come right back to trap us. We thought of turning off our headlights so that the cows wouldn't be drawn towards us. We believed that the cows were following our headlights. The cop finally drove by, and kept driving. He drove right past us and we were confused and concerned. That he just kept going. We figured that he missed where we were, and was going off into the darkness never to be seen again. Later the cop drove by again, and stops. He said that he couldn't find the cows. We were confused as they had just been on the road earlier. We ended up driving home, never seeing the cows again. It's almost as if the cows never existed. They probably walked off the road, but it still was strange. My house was built in 1905, and was previously a small hospital. We've had lots of creepy things happen. Some that stand out. Our downstairs radio will randomly turn on in the middle of the night, blaring music. Our kids have a toy magnet on the fridge that sings the ABCs. One night while fixing supper it kept playing by itself, so I switched it completely off thinking it was the batteries. I took 2 steps across the kitchen and it went off again. When my kids were little they would stare at the corners of the ceiling, like something was there. They would even smile and laugh while staring. And the creepiest one was right before we moved in. My dad was helping us install our washer and dryer. He had my nephew, who was 3 at the time, with him. My nephew had to use the bathroom, so I took him. While in the bathroom, he kept looking at the ceiling. I asked him what he was doing and he said he was listening to the kids upstairs playing. He then asked if he could go play with them. The only thing upstairs was the empty master bedroom and bathroom. I told him there were no kids upstairs. He got really angry and said he could hear them. Why couldn't he play with them? I had to take him upstairs to prove there wasn't anyone there. He shrugged his shoulders and said that's weird because I can still hear them. He still remembers this and hearing the kids upstairs. In high school I agreed to house sit for a friend of my grandparents while she was out of town over the weekend. Happened to be Halloween over that weekend. She had a lot of Native American art pieces and artifacts all over her house, as well as a collection of these old school oil cans. I don't know why, but I picked one up and pressed the bottom of one a few times and it made this distinct metallic popping sound that I thought was kinda cool. The lady also had an old, deaf dog I was charged with feeding and caring for. The first night there I stayed up late watching movies from her DVD collection, then finally went to be after midnight. I woke up startled and heard noises coming from the living area. It sounded like a bunch of the different oil cans making that popping noise. The dog was up and standing facing the closed bedroom door. I got a rush of chills and a knot in my stomach but stayed put till morning. The next day was Halloween and I asked my best friend if she could come stay the night with me, which she agreed to. I told her what happened and she thought it was odd but was also incredulous. We watched a movie and eventually went to bed. Woke up around the same time in the middle of the night to the sound and the dog doing the same thing. And then I looked over at my friend, thinking I should wake her up, but right as I thought that, she sat up, got out of bed without acknowledging me and went to the bathroom attached to the bedroom and brushed her teeth. She returned to bed without saying a word to me and laid back down to go to sleep. In all the sleepovers we'd ever had, which were quite a few, I'd never seen her sleepwalk before. Once again, I was too scared to do anything and stayed in bed paralyzed with fear until I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, after we'd both woken up, I asked her if she remembered waking up to brush her teeth and she said no, but was creeped out by it because she'd never sleepwalked before to her knowledge. Then we went out to the living room and saw that the furniture in the living room had shifted a bit. The fluffy carpeting showed the indents of where the furniture legs had been previously, about 2 inches away. Thankfully that was my last night having to watch the house, and I still don't know what to make of it, but I made sure to always have an excuse whenever the lady asked if I wanted to house sit again, and eventually she stopped asking. I used to live in a building which had flats belonging to my mother and her siblings. I lived there for almost 9 to 10 years and spent my entire childhood there. The building had 4 floors, and on the ground floor my grandma and my 2 uncles lived with their families, and on the first floor my family and my aunt's family had a flat each. There were a lot of weird things that happened in that house, but one thing that stands out the most to me is what I will tell you guys. When I was about 11, me and my aunt's son, who was around 9 at that time, were home alone at his flat, and the only other people in the building at that time were my mother and my grandmother, who were on the ground floor. My aunt worked as a civil drafter at that time, and she was in a remote village about 120-ish kilometers away from our town. They had the old type of a sofa set which had springs in it, and we loved to jump on them, but my aunt would get mad if we did that around her, so we grabbed this perfect opportunity and started jumping around. After some time I suddenly heard my aunt's voice saying, "Children, I'm home," and we both instantly sat down trying to act normal. After a few seconds it hit me that there is no way that she can be there, and I felt a weird sort of a cold draft run behind me, so I grabbed my younger cousin and ran to the floor below. I don't really remember what happened after that, but my mom tells me that I came to her and told her what happened, and she went up and checked and found nothing, so she locked up the doors and came back. Now I always thought that what I experienced was an auditory hallucination, as I was only 11 back then. During lockdown one night, me, my girlfriend, the cousin, my GF's best friend and another friend were talking about hallucinations and such on a phone call. That's when I told the story, and to my absolute surprise my cousin told me and the others that he heard the voice too. At first, I was skeptical because I always thought that he only panicked because of my actions, so I called him later and he swears that he did. Now I still haven't found an explanation to what we experienced that day. Although there is a local legend about a malicious entity called a Banshara in my state which lives in the Himalayan woods and calls out in the voice of a loved one who is far away to lure you, and our house was indeed on the edge of a locality and right next to some woods. Between the ages of 12 to 17 I shared a Jack and Jill bathroom with my little brother, who is 6 years younger than me. Being older, I would go to bed later than he would, and I was convinced that he either was possessed or had a demon living in his closet. He would often say things in his sleep when I was brushing my teeth that would scare me deeply. Sometimes it would be a conversation with someone named Simon, or he would talk about things he couldn't have known, like where I hid a new hunting knife that I just got. The most notable experience was one night I was getting ready for bed and all the lights in his room were off. I could tell by the crack at the bottom of his door. I finished brushing my teeth and I hear a light switch click on. I open the door and see his closet light on, but he is fast asleep and the closet door is closed. I close his door that lead to the bathroom, and about a second later I hear the light switch again and the light turns off and I hear his closet door open. I don't think I've noped out of situation faster. Ran straight to my parents' room and told them, and then I slept on the couch in their room. I've told my little brother that he used to talk a lot in his sleep, but I haven't told him that story because he is very superstitious and I don't want to freak him out any more than he already gets. My parents bought a house in the boonies when I was around 7 years old. The house was very, very cheap for the market in Canada in 2003. Come to find out, the man who had custom made the home was a paraplegic from a motorcycle accident and had committed suicide by shotgun in the master bedroom. My parents, being Lutheran, believed that it was a great deal and all they needed was a pastor to come bless the house, so they bought it. It was a 1-floor plan with a basement and a long hallway. Because the home was custom built for a paraplegic person, it had an elevator to take you to and from the basement. The elevator wasn't quiet, it would make a loud brrr sound all the way down. The house always had a scary vibe to it growing up. I would often see things out of the corner of my eye, smell a rotting type smell that just came and went out of nowhere, and so much more. One night I was in my bedroom, at the end of said long hallway. I was young, maybe like 10 or 11. I had always been terrified at night because of said house and it took me forever to fall asleep. This night, just as I was drifting off, I heard the loud brrrr. Now keep in mind, I'm an only child. My parents' bedroom was directly opposite mine and I knew that they had both gone to bed. I heard the elevator noise, and suddenly it stopped. As soon as it stopped I got this intense sadness and fear feeling. Something I had never felt before. I peeked out from under my covers to see a man in a wheelchair at the end of that hallway, his long hair swaying as he moved around. Oddly enough, he was almost translucent and I distinctly remember pinching myself and crying. I was so terrified. It was like I couldn't speak. He never looked directly at me, and I had a feeling like he wasn't there to harm me. Like he knew if he looked directly at me I would be more scared, so he avoided it. He was just there to see what had changed. As soon as he wheeled into the kitchen, he disappeared. I never saw him again, and my whole family insists it must have been a dream. I will never forget the intense feeling of despair I felt that day, that I assume he must have felt once too as well. R.I.P. Michael.